thanks very much. So the eagle-eyed amongst you will note it as a slight change to the advertised program. I'm not talking about AI in drug discovery, though it is a fascinating topic. Instead, I'm going to be talking about some new research looking at the customer experience that the pharmaceutical industry provides to healthcare professionals. But I think also hopefully there'll be some wider lessons in terms of anyone looking to interact with stakeholders across all the healthcare continuum, really, because the benefits of customer experience are manifold throughout the healthcare sector. The only downside of that is that customer in this usage, it's quite an inelegant word, but it nevertheless fits to some extent. But I actually want to start off with something slightly different. So I'm a big music fan, and this is my favorite record shop. And I was in All Ages Records at the weekend browsing, but also in the back of my mind thinking about this event. And it occurred to me that the record shop is a great example of somewhere that provides an excellent customer experience. It's hugely relevant to me. It focuses on a single genre of music. It's very simple to access. It's just across the way in North London in Camden, just around the corner from the tube station. And it's entirely trustworthy as well. I get on well with the owner, and he's far too good at recommending records that I should be buying. So as Jessica mentioned, my name's Dominic Tyre, and I'm a research director with the Indogene company DT Consulting. Prior to that, I was a journalist and editor and focusing solely on the pharmaceutical industry for about 20 years. And then last year joined DT Consulting, who are a specialist consulting house for the life sciences industry. And they focus on commercial strategy and digital transformation and also customer experience. And the company was set up in 2014, but they've been running an ongoing series of research surveys into customer experience since 2017. So in a minute, I'll be presenting some of the findings from our most recent research into customer experience in pharma. But first, before that, I'll look at why CX is important in the industry. Then we'll get on to the research, which looks at the current state of CX, and it's an exciting study we've conducted on a global basis for the first time. And in fact, the results haven't officially been published yet, so you do get to see some of them before anybody else. And then, time permitting, we'll look at what we can perhaps do to improve customer experience in pharma, but I think we'll also with some lessons for the wider healthcare sector as well. So why does CX matter? I mean, put simply, it's not just that it's an important business discipline, and there are manifold benefits for companies of all sorts if they can provide an excellent rather than a poor customer experience. You'll certainly be able to increase belief and engagement with products. But we also know from our research that it really matters to healthcare professionals as well. If they receive an excellent customer experience, they're much more likely to believe you understand what challenges they're facing, and indeed that you understand and appreciate the challenges that their patients face too. So if we come on to the new research then. So this is one of our ongoing CXQ studies. And the CXQ, just to go into a little bit of background to begin with, is our customer experience quotient. It's our healthcare-specific CX metric. And it's based on three key attributes. It's based on relevance, trust, and simplicity. And we use those three attributes because time and time again, when we've surveyed healthcare professionals, those are the three things they say are most important to them when they think, when they imagine what should go into customer experience. So thinking about this particular survey, as I've mentioned, it was conducted on a global basis for the first time. It involved over 6,000 healthcare professionals across 14 countries, and they were drawn from 8 different specialty areas. It's quite an up-to-date piece of research, so it's the first time, I don't know, if we're allowed to say we are post-COVID, and we sort of are and sort of aren't, it's kind of our first post-COVID research study that we've performed, and also has allowed us to benchmark the performance of pretty much all of the major pharmaceutical companies. So we'll come on to some of those findings in a minute. So the headline finding from the survey is that from a CXQ point of view, the industry across the globe, looking at all the companies involved in the survey, came at a score of 59, which equates, and hopefully you can see some of the detail on the screen, equates to a good finding. But it's not necessarily a really strong good ranking. It's not up to the 76% that would see it tip over into excellence. I think really for everyone here, in terms whether you're working for a pharmaceutical company or developing a digital therapeutic or another type of digital health application, the very least you want to be aiming for is good in terms of the experience that you're providing to your users. Digging into the global picture, and findings ranged from fair to good. Still no one troubling that excellent score. And then, sorry, there's going to be an awful lot of detail on this screen, but if you're able to focus just on the green and the red bars, perhaps. So this is a slide taken from our previous 2021 survey. This, the data from that was very much drawn from the COVID period. And this just illustrates the kind of transformation that engagement occurred during that period. And it's kind of what we would expect. So at the top here, we're asking healthcare professionals, what were they doing more of, as shown in green? What are they doing less of, as shown in red? And so the picture during the COVID time in terms of engagement was digital channels, as you'd expect. They're right at the top there with the larger green bars, and anything else that's more face-to-face comes right at the bottom with those larger red bars. So that was the COVID picture with that stark pivot to digital that we saw in healthcare, we saw in our daily lives, and all around us. Back up to the most recent survey, and we're looking here at the channels that the pharmaceutical industry uses most often to engage with healthcare professionals. So there's a few things here, one of which is the best performing channel is a video call. Maybe you can't see it with all the detail there. It's a video call with a medical representative. And so it's that hybrid use of technology combined to a more personal touch, a one-to-one touch that scores best among healthcare professionals. Close behind it on the non-digital side, you have face-to-face events such as this one here, and it's, I suppose, a reminder that if one is needed, that healthcare professionals, as we all do, value these sorts of chances to interact, to engage with people on a face-to-face level. But it also speaks to the need and the appreciation for educational content. I'm aware that there's quite a bit of detail on a lot of the slides, and they're probably coming out a little bit small for you, so I'm easy to find on LinkedIn if anyone wants a copy of the presentation later on. So when we come to ranking the major pharmaceutical companies and how they're performing in terms of the customer experience they provide to healthcare professionals, in this year's study, we found the leaders to be UCB, Gilead, and Novo Nordisk. Novo Nordisk typically has come in at the top of our rankings year on year, aided, I think, by its quite tightly coordinated, quite tightly focused product portfolio, historically just going for, or predominantly going for diabetes. I think it's probably unsurprising we see BioNTech and Moderna, the two COVID vaccine-focused companies, coming at the bottom of the rankings. One can only imagine the huge stresses and strains they've been under and the huge growth as companies they've seen during this time, and the consequent difficulties of trying to provide anything like a consistent customer experience. But it's interesting to look at maybe a company like Pfizer with a score of 56, and maybe a company like AbbVie with a score of 63. So 7% difference. They're, broadly speaking, similar companies. Pfizer, the largest company in the world, AbbVie, the second largest company in the world, and yet 7% is separating the customer experience that they're providing to healthcare professionals at the moment. When we look just at the use of digital channels, then we find that the leaders are different here, led by Bristol Myers Squibb, Boehringer, and Merck. Interestingly enough, BMS was actually the second to last position last year, so really, really dismal ranking last time around, and this time seems to have really pulled it back. But another theme from this slide and from the next slide when we look at the non-digital channels is just that there's a lower level of maturity in terms of digital channels compared to maybe the more traditional ones. So pretty much across the board here that you see the highest scores in terms of companies' non-digital channels, where we have Novo Nordisk and Gilead and Pierre Fabre back on top. But I think it's interesting here because we're talking about channels that the industry has been using for a long, long time, and it's still not able to provide an excellent customer experience. So I think it's really challenging companies to think again about how they're approaching the area, but also whether they're meeting healthcare professionals' needs. So a little bit of a look here and in terms of how the findings break down across the therapy areas. And again, you're seeing that variation in terms of how healthcare professionals report on the customer experience that they receive from the pharmaceutical industry. So we also asked healthcare professionals how they would rank pharma companies based on the personalization that they receive. If we think about customer experience, and that relevance is one of the elements that perhaps goes into how we measure it, then personalization, I think, is where a lot of pharma companies, maybe a lot of digital health companies are aiming. But it's not an easy thing to do. We see here still, we don't have that excellent rating among any individual company. But we also don't have an awful lot to differentiate the companies that certainly not in the top, maybe the top third of the rankings there. And that's a common theme among all of the rankings that I've been sharing with you today, that there aren't any companies really standing out at the moment. So I think it's a real, it's a glass half empty or half full, depending on how you want situation, depending on how you want to look at it. It's either a great opportunity because there's there's everything to play with, or companies aren't yet doing what they need to do to be able to meet healthcare professionals' needs. So if competition in terms of personalization is fierce, one of the things that companies might consider doing is to look at where they're not meeting healthcare professionals' needs. So we asked them particularly when it comes to the types of content that you receive from the pharmaceutical industry, and this is content in terms of both information or maybe a service as well. So that's a fairly wide-ranging definition of content. But in terms of that content, if you're not currently receiving a specific type of it, would you like to? In other words, what are the content gaps that they currently exist where you're just not getting the information or services that you need? So amongst those who weren't receiving these types, 91% of people said that they would like new clinical data. 90% said they would like new indication information. And that's fascinating for me because these are seemingly fairly obvious types of information to be imparting to healthcare professionals. But there's some obvious unmet needs in there. We're also asking healthcare professionals how often would they like to receive content from a single pharmaceutical company in any given month. And you can maybe or maybe not see it on the screen here, but up to pretty much for every single type of content there, so, up to 80% of respondents said they would like to receive that type of content no more than twice a month. And for within that 80%, 40% said they don't even want to receive it once a month. They want to receive it, but less than once a month. That's really challenging because for a lot of companies, pharmaceutical companies amongst them, there's often a desire to frame the question around how often can we send something out? How many emails can we send out? How many times can we try and engage our stakeholders? And I think what these sorts of findings suggest is that the question needs to be reframed. It needs to be, how can we make our engagements more effective? How can we better meet the needs of our stakeholders rather than trying to overload them with information? So just a few thoughts on what can we do then to improve customer experience. This is a slide taken, and it looks small on the screen even for me stood next to it, but that might just be my eyesight. So this is a slide taken from our COVID study. We're asking healthcare professionals, how do they currently interact with the pharma industry? In other words, what sort of communication or channels are used for that? And how would they like to interact with the pharmaceutical industry? So in terms of the channels that they're receiving, it's the dark blue bars, and those skew very heavily to face-to-face contact with sales or medical reps. But in terms of how healthcare professionals would like to interact with the industry, then it's pretty much every single one of those channels, from websites to physical newsletters to congress booths to email, the whole range that you might expect there. And I think, again, this is challenging companies to be able to be good at all of those channels, to provide an excellent customer experience through every single one of the channels that you use, and not to focus on your own assumptions around which channels would be best. This slide is from a different study again. So this slide comes from our most recent Digital Excellence Maturity Assessment of the pharmaceutical industry. So for this study, it's senior stakeholders within the pharmaceutical industry looking inside their own company to benchmark their performance against the other companies. I think it was 17 major pharmaceutical companies that took place in the study. So if we're thinking about what needs to be in place to provide an excellent customer experience, where there's a massive discrepancy, and it's been happening for as long as we've been running this sort of research, is in those behind-the-scenes capabilities that companies need. So if we use the analogy of maybe a restaurant, and the experience is the plate of food that arrives on your table, and that's the end product that we're looking for, then then the capabilities that deliver the food to your table would be those on-stage capabilities that are doing fairly well, those grey bars there. But it's really in the kitchen, the dark blue bars, where it's the more complicated capabilities where the focus needs to be. So it needs to be looking at things that are going to be year on year, an ongoing journey, that they're not necessarily tied to very immediate campaign milestones. We know that if you have a new digital health product coming out, you have your pharmaceutical company, you have a new drug launch, there are certain things you need to do, and they need to be done to very specific time-bound deadlines. Whereas there's much less force, much less sort of time pressure if you're looking at how do I improve my CRM system, or how do I get better at integrating the different channels that I need. But it is those that have the most potential to improve. So just to sum up then, for companies wanting to improve their customer experience, they really need to be thinking about what sort of content do your stakeholders actually want. Think about where the content gaps are, and move away from the content that isn't really going to make a difference. There needs to be some sort of reconciliation between maybe the high-tech and the high-touch engagement. So particularly if you're thinking about, from an industry point of view, sales representatives, which continue to be the mainstay of product promotion. It's looking at which of the strengths and weaknesses of the different channels that representatives can use, and how to integrate those. And then, as we saw from those clock slides with the overall message of not overloading stakeholders with information, another thing would be to anticipate those much shorter customer journeys. So companies can't keep bombarding customers with unwanted messages. They need to be much more targeted in the use of their channels, but also the content they provide. So we looked at healthcare professionals. We've run similar studies that have looked at clinical trial staff, and the customer experience currently the industry provides those is worse than, or rated worse, I should say, than that it provides to healthcare professionals. And then we have another survey looks at patients, and patients are even more critical of the information and services that they currently receive from the industry. So we're way away here from that sort of good table stakes measurement that the industry was achieving, thinking about its interactions with healthcare professionals, but in danger of going down into poor. So for an industry, for a sector that's trying to be human-centric, patient-centric, customer-centric, however we might term all of these things, there's still a lot more to be done in terms of the customer experience that's provided. So I'll finish up back on my favorite record shop. So this was a shop that didn't do digital at all until COVID hit. Until COVID hit, it was purely a bricks and mortar establishment, and it had to respond rapidly to the very obvious shutdown that we saw within the retail environment. And it was able to respond by scaling up an off-the-shelf sort of e-commerce website and increasing its use of social media to reach its customers. And it was through that dedication and passion that they were able to weather the storm of COVID. And I think if I can end up on any message, it's that where there's a will to improve, there will certainly be a way, but there's a lot of room for improvement, I think, at the moment. And thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for rounding up day one of Giant on the Digital Pharma Show in such a brilliant way. And I think it was really great actually to hear you kind of round out the panels that we've had that have very much all kind of covered similar topics, but also very different, but culminating in that ultimately we need the right data and information in the right way, at the right time, in the right place. And pharma customers are absolutely no different, whether it's clinicians, healthcare professionals, patients. They all matter and they all need to receive information in the right way at the right time. So thank you for that. One last round of applause for Dominic.
Thank you.
Thank you.